Well, hello, I'm Liz Watson, and I live in London, England. And I'm recording these two talks from home during the COVID-19 lockdown. So the two talks are going to focus on two people who left diaries of their own lives, lived in various sorts of confinement. As it happens, they're both from Amsterdam and lived in Amsterdam in the first half of the 20th century. The first one is the teenager, Anna Frank, and the second will be the young woman, Etty Hillesum. And looking at Anne Frank, I'm going to use the idea of growing up, of maturing, as a focus for looking at her story. And when it comes to Etty Hillesum, I'm going to use obedience as a focusing theme. But I'd like to link the two pieces with some words from a 20th century Welsh poet called Waldo Williams. So we'll begin with Anna Frank in this talk, and the quotation from Waldo Williams I'd like to begin with is this. So they're the first few words of his poem entitled "What is Man?" And he says, "What is living? The broad hall found between narrow walls." I'll read it again. What is living? The broad hall found between narrow walls. And his words there seem to throw out a particular challenge to us just now as we live in our various degrees and manners of confinement during this COVID-19 crisis, pandemic. A lawyer friend of mine once told me that there are more people coming to his office asking about divorce after Christmas than at any other time of the year. And perhaps you understand that. Being confined together, even in our families, even for celebration and according to well-practiced social custom, something we do every year, can make unfamiliar demands on us. We only really know who we are by the relationships we have with others, by the responses we receive from them, and the reactions we return. But when we're confined, our dwelling place can become a sort of intensified echo chamber with voices continually bouncing off the walls and no way to get away from them as we can do in our normal life, you might say. And if those voices which bounce back to us are loving, joyous, and forgiving, then the time of confinement can be a growing medium for deeper love and stronger relationships. We may indeed find a broader hall between the narrow walls. But if it's not like that, the narrow walls can seem to close in on us, while at the same time pushing us as people further apart. And yet these two types of experience are not necessarily as separate and opposed as I have made them seem. Stories have been told through all time in which suffering, restriction, and confinement have provided the very conditions in which a deeper and more contented flourishing is born. Well, you may know the story of Anna Frank through reading her diary, visiting the Anna Frank House Museum in Amsterdam, or seeing the play or the movie. But in case you don't know her or need a reminder, here is an outline. When she begins writing the diary by which she is most well known, It is June 1942. Anna is 13 years old, living with mum and dad and older sister Margot in Amsterdam. The family were originally German citizens, but moved to Amsterdam when Anna was 4. They were a Jewish family, but thoroughly assimilated, with mum keeping up the Friday prayers and the major Jewish festivals, but perfectly naturally marking the Dutch Christian feasts as well. They were an educated, cultured family, financed by Dad's successful business. When Anna's diary opens, Holland has been occupied by the Nazis since 1940. Restriction and persecution of Jews has escalated. And finally, the Franks decide there is no other choice but to hide out in a set of secret rooms on their business premises, entered through a door hidden behind a bookcase. A few trusted employees support them. And with them come the Van Pels family, mum, dad, and 16-year-old son Peter, and later a dentist, Fritz Pfeffer. So they move into these cramped secret quarters, these narrow halls, on the 20th of June, 1942. Remaining and surviving there for 2 years, until August the 1st, 1944, when they are discovered and forcibly removed to concentration camps. Anna dies in Bergen-Belsen in the spring of 1945, and only Dad survives. Well, what does it mean for a 13-year-old girl to grow up in circumstances like that? And really, Anna's diary gives us her answer to that question. What does it mean to grow up, to mature at all? Anna writes this at one point. I think it's odd that grown-ups quarrel so easily and so often and about such petty matters. Up to now, I always thought bickering was just something children did and that they outgrew it. This is Anna's comment about the Van Pels grown-ups, the new extension to her family in hiding, whose bickering seems to magnify as days and months go by. So you can see that they keep going round in the same hamster wheel, time after time, and never seem to learn from it. It doesn't look like an example of maturity to her. In fact, she begins to think at one point that maybe she is more mature than they are. But at the same time, she knows that she herself is looking for examples to follow as she tries to work out who she is and how she should behave in this very confusing time. Confusing because it's a confusing age to be. Confusing because life in what she calls the secret annex is a topsy-turvy life to be catapulted into. And confusing because the world at large has been turned upside down in a terrifying way. One of the features of living between narrow walls is that you see people in detail and in close-up in a way that you don't normally. Anna is a very good observer of others from the start. But what also begins to open up is an ability to observe herself with a degree of detachment. In one of her last diary entries, she writes, I have one outstanding trait in my character, which must strike anyone who knows me for any length of time. And that is my knowledge of myself. I can watch myself and my actions just like an outsider. Well, there's still a great deal of self-consciousness in it, but the work of real growing up has begun, as it always must, with self-knowledge. She often feels that within these walls, she is constantly assailed by barrages of criticism. She writes, "If I talk, everyone thinks I'm showing off. When I'm silent, they think I'm ridiculous. Rude if I answer, sly if I get a good idea, lazy if I'm tired, selfish if I eat a mouthful more than I should, stupid, cowardly, crafty, etc., etc., etc. The whole day long, I hear that I am nothing else but that I'm an insufferable baby." Well, that's a hard, intense place to be growing up. And with no other physical place to go and no other friends to turn to for a restorative perspective, the only option she finds is her diary. "When I write," she writes, "I shake off all my cares." And in her diary, she describes the way she copes with all this criticism she feels is coming at her. It's as though she's thrashing about between answering back, justifying herself to herself, making sure to get the last word, trying to say nothing, resolving to be better, standing her ground, criticizing herself, resentment at others, trying to learn from it, feeling low, weeping on her pillow, falling into confusion, often ending with that great adolescent cry of pain, frustration, and loneliness. "No one understands me." At one point, she wishes she could be someone else, but remarkably quickly realizes that you cannot escape your own nature, and it is pointless to imagine you can. You just have to learn to deal with it. And it is very much in her favor that she does indeed want to learn, hard though that turns out to be, for her, as indeed it is for us all. Looking back through her diary after a year in confinement, though, she's surprised and pleased to see signs of change, of maturing. She writes, "I have grown up a bit. I've grown wiser." How does she recognize that? She is both shocked to think that she could earlier have written of hating her mother, and pleased now that her tense and difficult relationship with her mother is easing a little. She writes, "I usually keep my mouth shut if I get annoyed, and so does she. So we appear to get on much better." And her attitude to the vexing Van Pels parents has changed too. She writes, "I suddenly see all the arguments and the rest of it in a different light, and I'm not as prejudiced as I was." She hopes that she's acquiring some insight, a sort of penetrating insight, which can make a difference to how she responds to people. She begins to think that a real, as distinct from a superficial Anna, is emerging, a true self, or a second Anna, she calls it. She can see that this real self is better, deeper, and purer than the other, and she likes it very much. One day, when she's sitting close to the Van Pels' son, Peter, she writes, "Suddenly, the ordinary Anna slipped away, and a second Anna took her place. A second Anna who is not reckless and jocular, but one who just wants to love and be gentle. And yet she continually finds it so hard to allow this second Anna to flourish. The first Anna so quickly pushes aside the second when it makes an appearance, so that no one else gets to see it and acknowledge and encourage it. Or if it does stay for a few moments, others are surprised. She herself doesn't know how to cope with it, and the first Anna flips it over with a joke and locks it back down into the secret place of isolation within. Yet she longs to be real, to let her real thoughts and feelings be known and shared. She soon begins to get some insight into what drives her ways of relating. She has always loved to be amusing and jokey, center of attention, with a little crowd of admirers and followers round her. Exhausting, though, she realizes. And at its root, she can now see it works as a way of banishing a frightening emptiness inside. How much better it would be, she can see so readily now, to set aside that superficial posing, undergo the loss of the admirers and followers, and find instead a few good, real friends who might begin to assuage her loneliness and allow her to be true. When she contemplates such possibilities, long comes the cry of frustration. But you won't listen to the advice given to you by your own better half. And to make it worse, when she does begin to find a streak of new strength and courage within her, it goes wrong. Her parents have asked her to draw back from the burgeoning romantic attachment between herself and Peter. She certainly does not intend to do that, rather the opposite. And she writes to her father to say so, claiming a hard-won independence at the age of now 14, denouncing any sense of responsibility towards her parents, who, she writes, have not supported her in the past year anyway. Her father is uncharacteristically deeply wounded by her letter. Both end up in tears when they sit down to talk about it. Afterwards, Anna understands so clearly that her letter was harsh and untrue, and she is ashamed that she could actually have been proud of it when she wrote it. Her father's ready forgiveness makes her even more ashamed. But she writes, "It's right that for once I've been taken down from my pedestal, but my pride has been shaken for a bit. For I was becoming too much taken up with myself again. Anyone who can cause such unhappiness to someone else, someone she professes to love, and on purpose too, is very, very low." Get it wrong is only human. To seek to justify one's actions, to defend oneself, is an equally all too human reaction. But to see the situation with crystal clarity and accept your responsibility without self-justification, as Anna is clearly able to do this time, this is where some real growing up, some real maturing begins. It would be wonderful to go on to say that gradually she does find the inner confidence and humility, security and freedom she needs, and that she does continue to develop the greater love and compassion which naturally flow from this way of maturing from the inside out. But the diary is nearly at its end, so we cannot know. In fact, the diary ends on a low note, It goes. And finally, I twist my heart round again so that the bad is on the outside and the good is on the inside. And keep on trying to find a way of becoming what I would so like to be and what I could be if there weren't any other people living in the world. Right from the start, though, she keeps glimpsing something about herself, which is lodged very deep in the inner recesses of her heart, and which she begins to suspect underlies her many troubles. She's constantly longing for an intimacy she cannot find with any other person, and feels a penetrating, isolating loneliness within herself that she has no idea how to cure. Being at close quarters with her family and the other residents of the secret annex turns out to be the opposite of a remedy in the beginning. Instead of feeling a deeper love, support, and understanding in these dangerous, fragile, and frightening times, she quickly begins to feel deserted, and more than that, as though she is surrounded by a great, threatening void. There is none of the usual fun and distractions with her friends. So she's prey to thoughts about unhappy things or about herself. Even worse, she is brought face to face with the realization that her beloved daddy, who is so very, very dear to her, cannot and will never be able to fill this void. Where then can she turn? Gradually she gets to know the Van Pels's son Peter, rather shy and turned in on himself. She thinks she might be able to help him open up and thereby find a new friend to share her heart with. A romance develops with all the excitement and palpitations of the heart that go along with the first embrace, the first kiss, and the promise of being able to share intimate matters. And yet, it isn't enough. And in any case, she feels he is beginning to lean on her instead of learning to stand on his own feet, which she feels would be bad for them both. There is only her diary. Kitty, she calls her diary, because it is like the best sort of friend to her, a real friend. Anna loves the quote, "Paper is patient." I want to write, but more than that, I want to bring out all kinds of things that lie buried deep in my heart. In a diary, you can pour your heart out, what you really think and feel. You don't have to hold back. You won't be judged, condemned, or misunderstood. You can be serious and fearless. You can safely enter your inner room when you write to Dear Kitty. Is God there too? Well, yes, in a shadowy way, and beginning to emerge from the shadows, but not yet to take the place of Kitty or become the ultimate source of love and intimacy she longs for, or the way to transmute the void into a broad hall to dwell in. Returning finally to the theme of maturing, growing up. She's already realized that maturing isn't easy. It's much easier to live a superficial life and reconcile yourself to that. But in the end, She writes, all these troubles have made me older.